Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Get to Know Canadian Gaming podcast, brought to you by the Canadian Gaming Association. I'm Steve McAllister, the Editor-in-Chief of Gaming News Canada, and your guest host today. The prevention of money laundering in the gambling industry, particularly in this newish world of online gaming and sports betting, is top of mind with stakeholders across the industry these days. So, to learn more about those efforts, we welcome to the podcast Paul Burns, the President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, Amanda Brewer, Senior Advisor for the Canadian Gaming Association, and Derek Ramm, the Global Head of Advisory Services for Kinectify and a board member of the Canadian Gaming Association. Hey, Paul, I'd like to start off, for the listeners who are newcomers to the business of gaming, can you maybe tee up a bit of a lesson, an AML 101, sort of put it that way?
For sure, and thanks, Steve, for taking on the hosting duties this week. The industry's commitment to anti-money laundering is long and strong, in the sense that we have been a very good participant as one of the designated industries that reports. Not every business in Canada is required to report to FinTrack on handling of cash transactions or suspicious transactions. So as one of those designated industries, there's been a long, strong commitment to enhancing and working as technologies evolved, as the industry's evolved, and as those who are trying to launder funds evolve their practices. We've been able to keep pace in a strong way. But where we are right now is that the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and the Financing of Terrorism Act, as it's referred to in Parliament, does have a sort of mandatory 5-year review process built into it. Finance kicked that review process off in 2023 with a consultation paper, which the CGA and lots from the industry did contribute a very fulsome outline of what we need to see in going forward from changes to the legislation. The unfortunate part is that consultation was to inform a parliamentary review, which has never happened. And in subsequent, there has been some one-off measures in various budget bills and other coming. The latest one in Bill C2, the Strong Borders Act, which actually bans cash transactions over $10,000 in Canada. So we've been very strong in voicing our need to see an overhaul of the act, because the legislation is not kept pace with our industry. And I'll let Derek and Amanda chime in too, because, for example, it still doesn't include horse racing. We've made that request years ago, that horse racing be included as a reporting product inside of the AML regime. But it doesn't mention sports betting. It doesn't specifically mention online gaming. The definition of a casino is built around a building with 4 walls, which is the evolution of our industry has been such that it's well beyond that. And so these are just some of the highlights in terms of where we are. And so one of the things is a lot of the discussion around money laundering in our sector, we're concerned the fact that the legislation hasn't kept pace with the sector, and it's posed some challenges. And we'll get into some of that as we continue our conversation. But I'll let Derek or Amanda add in any more at this point that I may not have touched on.
Go ahead, Derek.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Paul, you hit the nail on the head. That, I mean, in Canada, we've just in the last 4 to 5 years, online gaming has exploded, both from the provincial lottery corporations that have rolled it out, from the fact that single event sports betting has been allowed. Ontario's opened the market with now more than 50 operators in the market. Alberta's going to open the market, and we know that many other provinces are looking at a similar model where they open up the online market. The legislation simply hasn't kept pace with those changes when it comes to AML. And I've made this joke before, I apologize for making it again, but you've got a very unlevel playing field, particularly as it pertains to online gaming and sports betting. Very similar though, the thing is our friends to the south are going through the same challenge, in that their AML laws have not kept up with the explosion of online gaming and sports betting, and very similar situations where the AML laws are applied very unevenly to regulated wagering.
So just to kind of go full circle between Paul and Derek. So on behalf of the association and its members, and what we've been advocating for several years now, is really greater operational efficiency when it comes to AML reporting. We've been asked for enhanced information sharing, specifically private to private, because that's not what exists right now. It's very hard to expect an entity that doesn't have a direct line of sight with the customer or the player to know what's going on. And we also want, performance metrics that prioritize measurable outcomes, not just, collecting a lot of paper and sticking it on the pile. We want measurable outcomes. So focusing more on the quality of what the industry is reporting on versus the quantity of it. So that is, like, in a nutshell, what the association is looking for. So specifically, we would really like the federal government to be persuaded that the PCML TFA, really rolls off the tongue nicely, necessitates a thorough review and not just a piecemeal approach, because unfortunately that's what we're seeing coming out of them now. And in our opinion, given the advent of regulated online gaming and sports betting in Ontario and soon Alberta, the absence of horse racing in this, it needs an overhaul. It doesn't need these like little one-offs that they're willing to do, but doesn't even come close to addressing the need that we have.
Hey, Derek, maybe we start with you. I mean, this podcast and this topic, the timing couldn't be better, given that we've had a couple of fairly big stories in the industry this summer. First, we learned that FinTrack had fined the CNE Casino almost $200,000 for AML-related activities. And then it came out not too long ago that the British Columbia Lottery Corporation is suing FinTrack, I think, after FinTrack issued I believe it's a $1 million fine. Can you just walk the listeners through, what those, why FinTrack took that action and why both these fines are so contentious?
I mean, it's been a long time. I used to work at FinTrack, but it's been quite a while, so I don't really have insight into why they're doing. I can theorize. I have a bunch of theories. First and foremost is obviously the Financial Action Task Force review, which is an international body that sets standards for combating illicit financial activity, financing of terrorism, and what's called proliferation financing. And Canada's a member of this organization, as are most industrialized nations. And usually every 5 to 6 years, countries go through what's called a mutual evaluation, which is really an audit of whether the country is doing a good job of combating things like money laundering. So Canada's been in that process now, I think, for about a year. The actual assessment team is coming to the country, I believe, in November for their on-site portion, which will probably be a month or so spent on site. And then we'll probably start to see some preliminary findings in late 2026. And why this is all important is countries that don't get good report cards tend to face economic sanctions and other issues. It can hamper international investment because the money may not flow as freely into the country if there's concerns that the country doesn't have adequate controls in place. So Canada takes it very seriously. I think that's a critical driver for why we're seeing a lot of activity from the Department of Finance and from FinTrack. We also have, to the south of us, we've got an administration that is very focused on border and trade issues and is using fentanyl as sort of the main rationale for imposing tariffs on Canada and other countries. And so they're concerned about fentanyl trafficking. So again, Canada needs to sort of settle that whole discussion down between the two countries. We obviously need to take a tough stance on it. So we've seen, I think the gaming industry has received a number of fines very recently. I'm pretty sure we're going to see a few more before this year is out. I'm not saying that that's the reason why the fines are being dropped, but there's certainly there's a big context here where Canada is under a lot of pressure to look like it's doing something. My concern with that, and I've been pretty vocal about this in podcasts and online, is that I think it's a lot of form over substance, and it's really sort of tick box compliance, which is something that the Financial Action Task Force is very clear. They don't like tick box compliance. They want regulators, they want businesses to be focusing on the stuff that matters and the stuff that's risky. And I think, dropping fines because there's a gap in your policies or you missed a very prescriptive aspect of the act is a bit, it's missing the forest for the trees, because you really need to focus on, well, where is the actual risk here? I mean, clearly with casinos and in the case of the C&E casino, I think it was they didn't quite do their 2-year review in accordance with the regulations, and there was some risk factors missing from their policies. To me, having been a regulator, that doesn't point to systemic failures of the compliance programs. That points to issues that need to be addressed. And typically the way regulators behave, or normal regulators behave, is they'll tell the business, okay, you need to fix this because you're not really in compliance with the law. We'll come back in a year or so to check if it's been fixed. And if it hasn't been fixed, then we're going to have a different conversation. But my understanding, again, just going by the news release and FinTrack's release on the fine earlier this week, is that this was the first time the C&E had been reviewed. They received pretty much the maximum penalty for, again, what I don't view as systemic compliance failures. And I think that's where, I've used this term before, I think that's where FinTrack probably has lost the plot a little bit on enforcement.
Paul, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've had a challenge with is that because now, and it's only gotten more difficult because the definitions under the Act are becoming more out of date as the days go by, is that we've had an agency that has been focused on quantity over quality. So giving volume of reports, report. We report on every transaction, and we do that. And not every jurisdiction in the world does that. And in fact, we file more reports as a country than the UK, US, and others because we don't form on looking for suspicious activity or patterns, but actually on every transaction. And part of that's related to our privacy laws, part of it's related to other things that everything can be overcome if you want to lean in to do the work. The other side is that we've also been thought of as a banking industry, and it's kind of the square peg in the round hole. And let's see if we can jam the policies we've created for the banking industry into a gaming industry. We have a very different relationship with our customers in some ways. In other ways, we have much the same. And we also have additional policies over and above on cash handling, source of funds, and other things in various jurisdictions as well.
Your customer
all of those things that we need to do for good compliance that are done. Sometimes they don't want to take into account, or it's interpretation. And some of that is that their willingness to learn and lean in to understand the sector that they're regulating, and that the gaming industry, which is one of the things that we've had a really significant problem with the structure. As people may or may not know, that the companies, the casinos who deal with the customer in the front line aren't necessarily the reporting entity that reports to FinTrack. So it goes through the Crown agencies as the conductive managers of the reporting entities. So in some jurisdictions, that's fine. Quebec, a lot of Quebec runs and operates a casino. They're the reporting entity. In British Columbia, there's private operators running casinos. Same in Ontario, the online operators in Ontario. And all of this feeds through a third party and we're trying to say, well, can we simplify this and let those who deal with the customer file direct? And in being able to make and simplify the compliance burden, but also keeping this in context. Derek, what the gaming industry provides, about 3% of the total reports that FinTrack get in a given year? Is that, I may be overestimating?
It's small. That's for sure. I got off the top of my head. I don't know that stat. I will say, the largest reporter are financial institutions, and part of that, Paul, to your point, the reason why Canada actually files more reports than say the UK or the US is because we've got electronic funds transfer reporting, which casinos don't really do. It's very minimal in the online space. But that is probably one of the most common reports that FinTrack receives, and that's driven largely by the financial institutions. So yeah, the gaming sector by and large is a very small percentage overall of all the intelligence that FinTrack collects.
Amanda, you moderated a panel back in June at the Canadian Gaming Summit on AML. I think Derek was one of the panelists with you that day. Can you just talk a little bit about what the Canadian Gaming Association is working on with respect to FinTrack and FATF?
Yeah, it's turned into a bit of a long-term project, which, as Paul said, we have an AML committee, which I sit on, Paul sits on, Derek sits on. And I was coordinating our response to that initial consultation with the expectation that the parliamentary review would happen, and it didn't. And so it's been an ongoing shift of our efforts now in anticipation of a parliamentary review. That didn't happen. And now with the FATF review coming up, as many opportunities for consultation with FinTrack and the Department of Finance as we can have. So there have been several meetings that the three of us, or combinations of the three of us, have attended. A couple just recently that Paul and Derek can speak to better than me. But I'm actually working on right now on behalf of the association a kind of, lack of a better term, a master plan, because we don't know how long we're going to have to be pressing our case and pressing our issues with the government, because as recently as 2 months ago, they're alleging that the cash ban that they want to introduce in Bill C2 is there because there's a risk that fentanyl dealers are laundering their money through casinos, which just shows the absolute lack of understanding of the KYC, know your customer process, and how cash is not anonymous when it comes into a casino, and all the rest of the checks and balances that our land-based operators use. So there still is a lot of lack of understanding. And one of our big issues as well is the fact that an online industry was created and launched in Ontario, and FinTrack has never come to consult with the operators and learn about it and inform themselves, and then maybe use that information to go and make the changes that would make the reporting of suspicious transactions that much more efficient and effective. None of that has ever happened. So that would seem to be table stakes. Maybe I can't think of too many industries that launch where nobody bothers to come and learn about them and just takes existing standards and applies them on top. So all that to say is I see this, and the association sees this as really a bit of a long-term project as we try to get some, sort of provinces interested in taking up the cause as well. Some, people in Ottawa interested in taking up the cause. We've met with the Canadian Bankers Association that shares a lot of our same issues. So as we kind of all come back from Labor Day now, and we're looking ahead to the end of this year and into next year, it's really trying to put some tactics in place, put some messaging in place, and figuring out, who we need to engage, because this industry is only going to keep expanding across Canada. And the fact that we're still using very outdated standards is, it's a problem. We're not catching suspicious transactions right now, given the volume of reporting that's happening. It's the reports aren't doing their job. So over to you, Derek.
I wouldn't necessarily say that, Amanda, that they're not catching.
Well, I'm thinking of the casino disbursement report.
But I think, what the CGA's really been advocating for is a system that makes sense for the industry. So, Canada's got a very complex legal framework for gambling because of the criminal code and the conduct and manage requirements. So you've got the Crown agencies sort of sitting between the folks that actually run the business and the Federal Financial Intelligence Unit, FinTrack. And then as Paul's already kind of gone through some of the gaps in the legislation, the fact that it hasn't kept pace with the way the industry's evolved, we're advocating for just a much more neutral kind of a focus on the activity of regulated wagering versus trying to define what an actual casino is, and focus on, and that sort of has some, the sort of consequences of that is then, okay, well, who's ultimately accountable? And in most cases, that's going to be the person that has a direct interaction with the customer, which ultimately will give FinTrack and law enforcement better information, because these are the people that are actually dealing with the customer versus the information being filtered through the Crown Lottery Agency, which in most cases doesn't have any interaction with the customer, doesn't even process the financial transaction. So it cuts out a lot of the red tape and a lot of the inefficiencies. And in my view, makes the system more effective for both the gaming operators and for FinTrack.
Yeah. And one of the things what we're trying to do from it is build effective, efficient regulation here and oversight, because we want to make the system work better for everybody, finding ways that we can more effectively and efficiently collect the information required, building a robust system that reflects the nature of the way the activities are occurring. And this all needs, it's unfortunate, and not to lay it all on FinTrack, but the federal government has chosen not to do this. And that's where we've reached out to other sectors, because they're equally frustrated that the act is out of date. And that's and the fact where we've tried to build some common cause is around these things, that the fact that there needs to be the parliamentary review, there needs to be a wholesale review of the act. Amanda's had conversations with Alderney, who have working with FATF and trying to look at best practices in the online gaming space. Like, these are kinds of things we want to bring to bear. We want to make sure that they can do things better, effectively, and more efficiently. And that's what we're trying here. It's really about building the best effective system we can.
And may I just add one more thing? Because of the review coming up in a couple of months' time, right now the fear is, because Canada didn't do the parliamentary review, it's not prepared, it's ill-prepared. It didn't do what it was supposed to do in the ensuing years. We're going to see some knee-jerk reactions to things they should have done, and we might get some really questionable decisions coming out of Ottawa, and that's also something that we're being very vigilant about, because that's also not a really good way to shape policy, AML policy, for our industry.
Hey, Paul, just on that, what are the risks to the industry if nothing does change in the next, say, 12 to 18 months?
Well, you still have basically what I would say gaps in like the fact that horse racing has never been included in the AML reporting from the gaming industry. The definition of sports betting doesn't exist. I think that the industry is working very hard and diligently, as operators do, to enhance their policies, and they continue to learn and adapt. And Derek can speak whether it's embracing new technology to give them better intelligence and better reporting, to making it more efficient, but also then they continue to invest in training. They continue to invest, but at some point that you need some help, and that help comes in the form of effective legislation and regulation. And that's the part that ultimately, we are one leg in the stool, shall we say, of the AML regime, and that we don't catch criminals, right? We're in the deterring and reporting a leg of that, and not necessarily. And that's where the biggest failure in this country, in my opinion, is the fact that we can't seem to prosecute and properly investigate financial crimes. We're one of the only G7. We are the only G7 nation without a financial crimes unit.
That was Paul. Sorry to interrupt. That was in terms of how long the parliamentary review is taking. The Financial Crime Agency's been proposed. I think we're now into the third year, and I really haven't seen much movement in the way of creating an agency that basically an enforcement arm of the government that's responsible for financial crimes. And if something is going on, there's not been a heck of a lot of public communication on what's going on with that agency 3 years into it.
Derek, I'm going to start with you on this one. And all three of you have had kind of unique ties to your own unique ties to the market in Ontario. And it was very, very recently, iGaming Ontario announced the hiring of Joseph Hillier as the new president and CEO, and Joseph begins his new duties on September 8th. And one of the things at the top of his to-do list is an AML platform for the 50 operators or for those operators in the industry right now. Is that something that needs to be addressed right away, Derek? And can you maybe just explain again to our listeners kind of the history of AML and the Ontario market since it opened in April 2022?
Yeah. So, I mean, I work for an AML solutions provider, so obviously I'm a little biased, although, 30 years of my career has pretty much been in the anti-financial crime space. But yeah, so the market opened April 2022 without a solution in place for AML or self-exclusion or financial reporting or pretty much any, frankly, any technology in place. And part of that, in fairness to the AGCO, IGO, and everyone that was involved in getting this market off the ground, there was a lot of pressure. The initial deadline had actually been missed, but everyone quickly recovered and the market got launched. It was only 4 months late, I think. And I've said this many times. I think by and large, it's a massive success story that other jurisdictions, not just within Canada, but elsewhere, should look at. But there are some lessons learned, and the lack of technology when the market launched is the biggest lesson I think that can be learned, because it was tenable for a very short period when there was only a few operators and there wasn't a lot of self-exclusions. There wasn't a lot of AML reporting. You could do things manually to a degree, but I think, within the first 6 months, it became abundantly clear that the lack of technology was a massive issue, both in terms of the resources required to deal with all these manual processes, and just the fact that, particularly in the online space, when you're dealing with, frankly, billions of transactions, human beings simply cannot effectively analyze that volume of transactions. You need some sort of technology in place to be able to look at those billions of transactions and say, here's the ones we need to worry about. So that's a huge problem. It continues to be a huge problem. And, if I was in Joseph's shoes, I think all of that, I mean, yes, AML is a massive priority, but I think just technology in general, again, whether it's self-exclusion, whether it's the automated financial reporting, that needs to be priority number one. And they need to take a serious look at kind of where they're at, how they got there, and correct course pretty quickly.
Amanda, you did lead an Ontario operator or an operator's business in Ontario at some point. Just your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with what Derek said. I mean, I still remember Martha Otten when Paul and the CGA did a 1-year anniversary sort of celebration, and she stood up and she acknowledged, they call it MVP for minimally viable product. She acknowledged that, it was sort of, they were forced to launch that way. But that was, 3 years ago at this point in time, pretty much. She stood up and announced that, and the fact that nothing has been able to change in 3 years. So I did see your Gaming News Canada email yesterday, and they were talking about lots of consultants running around. I don't know the inner workings of IGO at this point in time, but it feels like an AML solution could have been procured much faster, and there could have been one in place now. And the fact that we are now, 3.5 years into the market, and we still don't have anything in place. My fear is, don't let, something that's really good, not ever go anywhere because you're waiting to try to make it perfect. Like, don't let perfect be the be all and end all. Like, something that's really good, really effective, you can get it off the ground soon, you can provide relief to your operators. That to me would be ideal at this point in time. We don't need a Cadillac. Like, a really good Subaru will do just fine at this point in time.
I have to, I guess, Steve, for your benefit and the benefit of folks listening in, I have to be fully disclose this. So Kinectify there was an RFP for AML when the market launched. My firm won that RFP. It was prior to me joining Kinectify, so I wasn't involved in those discussions. I don't know why that RFP really didn't proceed, other than the fact that IGO dropped out. But the one thing I will say, that's a bit of a plug, I guess, but we're deployed in over 80 operators throughout North America, and we can deploy as quick as 3 months in terms of our time. Now, again, I'm on the advisory side. I'm not really a techie guy, but I do know we've done some pretty quick deployments with some of our clients when it comes to AML tech. So it's the reason why I raise that is that it shouldn't take another year to get a solution in place for Ontario, or for at least for the Ontario online gaming market. It can be done relatively quickly.
Paul?
Well, yeah, no, I agree with my colleagues here. The biggest challenge has always been too was what came in the middle of some of this too. To be fair to IGO, was that they working through a web portal reporting tool that FinTrack offered when the FinTrack had a cyber breach and shut it down for months, made not a very good system bad, and in the backlog of FinTrack's inability to get that portal back up and running in an effective manner, it took months, and in the fact that it opened and then closed again because the operability was so horrible, and the fact that its actually performance is probably worse than it was originally. So that has led to making what wasn't a great situation horrible, and so we're now in this position where there is need for technology soon, because it's the compliance cost burden to operators, is especially large ones, has been significant, and that's the challenge we have. Is that part of this is the cost of compliance is a big issue for us as the CGA, and looking with operators and making sure that it doesn't get to be an untenable situation, that there is effective regulatory procedures in place. Yes, there's a cost to it, but when they become overly burdensome and excessive in cost, it's a problem. And that's where we the need for solutions soon is now, it's critical now. And that's, as we look to other jurisdictions like Alberta in their discussions, there's lessons to be learned as well. And so that's the other good part, is that for others is that you can watch, learn, and listen from what the experience has been.
Funny, Paul, I was just about to ask you about Alberta. I mean, what is it that the provincial government can do to try to make for a little bit smoother landing? And I think, again, maybe the cost of compliance is part of that. But what do you see a province like Alberta doing as it prepares for an open market there?
Well, first and foremost is they do have some technology, and through AGLC, who is a reporting entity, and that hopefully can be found a way to be used by operators in Alberta. And then second is sitting down with operators and understanding the risk profile. And Derek can speak to this better than I can, but building a system that's, one, effective and reasonable and fair in terms of the level of reporting, one, that meets FinTrack obligations, but two, meets the obligations that the regulator may have. And so those are both, and and I think those are conversations that I think everybody's looking forward to having in Alberta, to make sure that what comes out is not only effective for meeting the regulatory needs and needs of FinTrack, but also for operators.
Derek?
Yeah, I think technology has been thrown around that word quite a bit. I think from not just from an operational effectiveness and efficiency, because there's a lot of labor hours in Ontario now that are being expended that don't need to be. But also going back to my point about when you've got a robust online market that's thriving, there's billions of transactions, and you just, from a risk perspective, what would concern me if I was, on the executive at IGO or on the board is, like, what do we don't know, or what are we missing? Because that's a lot of transactions to go through and try and have just a team of a few dozen people sort through to decide, what's worthy of follow-up. So there's both a tremendous financial cost to doing things manually, but just from a compliance and financial crime risk, I think it's pretty substantial not having technology in place.
I guess one of the things that we've heard from some of our members is that they're sort of looking at Ontario and saying that if things don't change soon, Ontario risks lagging behind other jurisdictions globally because of their unwillingness or inability to automate things, embrace technology, embrace AI, which other jurisdictions seem to be able to do or are doing. And that would be a shame.
I'll throw it out to the three of you. Like, is there a country or a U.S. state that is doing a bang up job right now on AML? Is there a model that could be followed here in Canada?
I think the Moneyvale one. So Paul was talking about, looking over at Alderney. So Moneyvale is it's a committee of experts on sort of AML and terrorist financing, and it was established in about 1997 and has 35 member states and jurisdictions. So it's over in Europe, but they've been at this longer than we have here in terms of online. But they use a risk-based approach. So they recognize that it varies by customer and by region, and it allows operators to tailor policies to specific risks instead of putting like a very prescriptive set of steps in front of operators and saying no deviation. It doesn't matter what you see, you're following these steps, which is what we do here. And so it really has allowed them to have cost-effective risk management systems, and it prioritizes the efforts that an operator put into it on the likelihood of some money laundering or terrorist financing that could happen or could occur. So that's just like a really brief overview of the Moneyvale risk-based approach. But that's certainly something that we look at and think, yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. This seems like something that should definitely work here in Canada. And going back to the work that the association is doing, it's trying to start having conversations in Ottawa to say, here, we have something we can show you in another jurisdiction. 35 countries are using it, and it's working really well and really efficiently, and it's very effective. So why can't we look at something like that here? Okay, I don't know how successful we'll be, but that's what we'll try to do.
Hey, Derek, give you a chance here. I guess a chance here to plug Kinectify. So you may have to write a check to Paul and Amanda to help pay for this podcast. But just in terms like what advice is it a company like Kinectify gives to operators who are coming into the market like Ontario or which we'll see in the next 10 to 12 months, I guess, in Alberta as well. Like, what advice can you give operators to have kind of their I's dotted and T's crossed when it relates to AML?
I would say, regardless, again, Canada's got this unique conduct and manage model where the provincial gaming and lottery corporations are considered the responsible entity. But whether they implement technology or not, I think the operators should not wait to see what they're doing and implement, because yes, FINTRAC will hold the provincial lottery corporations accountable, but the provincial regulators will hold you accountable if you're an operator for failures. And I mean, we're seeing it's not just in Canada. We've seen a few relatively minor fines in Canada, but when you look at jurisdictions like the United States and Australia, there are some very, very significant actions. And I think I not to sound like I'm fear-mongering, but I think we've only seen the beginning right now in Canadian gaming. I think we're going to see a number of fines in the coming months, and they're going to be escalating in terms of the actual dollar value.
Hey, Paul, I'll give the last word to you. I mean, just given what Derek just said, I mean, is AML's taking up most of your and Amanda's time right now at the Canadian Gaming Association? And if that's the case, what are next steps for the association?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Derek was mentioning too, I think that what we see is that a lot of these fines and other things we're seeing are really around, as Derek referred to, as checkbox and compliance related, and not actual failures and money laundering occurring. I mean, I would point out, even from the Cullen Commission reviews, there was, of the 104 recommendations, 4 of them were for the gaming industry. 2 of them had been implemented before the recommendations were made public. And the fact is that FINTRAC never fined BCLC or anybody over the handling of any of those transactions, because all the reporting was done and the investigative was done, and players were banned and cash was removed. And the fact is that there was an inability for investigation and prosecution. And so what we're trying to continue is to say that the industry people throw broad brushes around and talk about money laundering and gaming and so on, but understanding that our industry does a really good job and effective, and continues to lean into wanting to do better. And that's where we're coming from on this, is that we want to make sure that we build a really effective regime. And so going forward it is taking a lot of our time. Why? Because we don't have the government isn't of the day chose not to do a parliamentary review. We have one-off instances of changes, which generally is never a good way to do public policy. The cash ban of $10,000 in the broader economy was done without any consultation in any meaningful way. The Bankers Association, the Chamber of Commerce, nobody was really informed of this and the impact it will have on the Canadian economy, let alone are there other tools that you could use to expand reporting versus banning cash. Because you may not solve the money laundering issue simply by banning cash and you think things are going to go away. That's foolish to think that. And so what we're trying to keep the voice of, we need change. We need a comprehensive, effective change to reviewing the act to happen sooner rather than later. And these one-offs are only serving to the cash ban, and will have significant impacts on the gaming industry from an operational point of view, because there's a 24-hour rule. So if someone's hits a $10,000 threshold within a 24-hour period, we're going to have to immediately stop people from playing. How do you track that in real time? How do you train staff? The impact of what that changes the whole mechanism of business operation. And they don't even seem to understand that in making this change and what it means to the sector. So these are the things that we're going to keep us busy. And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking to folks in Ottawa in the next several months because of this. And because, we're just we want to see, as I go back and I keep saying, effective, efficient regulation.
Yeah, if I could pick up on that, Paul, particularly with the cash limitations, it's certainly something that the CGA is advocating strongly on behalf of the industry, because it really will impact the land-based industry. I don't think a lot of, not just in gaming, I don't think a lot of the operational aspects have really been thought through in even the retail sector. But one of the things that in conversations that Paul and I and some of the other CGA members have had with the government that stood out to me is there seems to be a real stigma around cash. And I fully understand. I've doing anti-financial crime work for 30 years. I get cash is certainly the currency of choice, especially for things like drug trafficking. But when you start to look at the hard data, like FinTrack, for example, and the millions of large cash transaction reports that they receive every year, their own data shows that less than 0.5% of those cash transactions are actually used in intelligence disclosures. So what's the concern around cash? Is that concern actually misplaced? And if you limit cash, does anyone seriously think that fentanyl trafficking is just going to stop because there's now a limit on cash? I would say the concern I have as a financial crime professional is that's going to drive a lot of activity underground that no one's going to have eyes on, because there's no more reporting, there's no more regulatory oversight, because everything's happening in the illicit market.
And we've even suggested that it may drive more to crypto, which they don't even regulate, and they have no line of sight. So the when is there needs to be a more fulsome discussion when changes like this, and that again goes back to the need for the parliamentary review
and consultation with the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Paul, if anyone wants to get in touch with you or Amanda, or wants more information on the Canadian Gaming Association, where should they go?
Well, always visit us at canadiangaming.ca. Lots of information on our website, including information about membership and other things that we do. Or feel free to reach out to Amanda or I.
That's Paul Burns, the President and CEO of the Association. He's joined today by Amanda Brewer, Senior Advisor of the Canadian Gaming Association, and also by Derek Ramm, the Global Head of Advisory Service for Kinectify. All three of you, thanks very much for joining us on this latest episode of the Get to Know Canadian Gaming. And we will see everybody again very soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.